Hi guys, it's Charlie from Monocular 3D in Sydney. We're at Oz Comic Con. Wow, check it out, it's amazing. The costumes have been incredible. Look at this, this is a full axe, fully 3D printed of course, and painted, and one of the props on our stand. We've had a great time, let's go and have a look. Today we'll be talking to 3D printing expert and proud Monocular 3D ambassador, Chris Bannerman. Chris runs his 3D printing business from the Central Coast of New South Wales, and he's now working for us in the 3D print lab. He loves all things science fiction, fantasy, cosplay, and of course 3D printing. He joined us in the studio. Chris, thanks for joining us. So Chris, how did you get into 3D printing?
I got into 3D printing when we first organised to build a printer at our local primary school where I volunteer. So we went down with the kit printer, the kids built the printer over a few weeks. Yeah. And I got so excited by 3D printing and its possibilities that I decided to get one myself and I built it, and then it went from there. Yeah. People just wanted more stuff made, so I just bought more printers until we now have over a dozen printers.
Okay, and what about cosplay? How did you get into cosplay?
Cosplay is one of those things where, you know, when you're a kid, you love dressing up as Spider-Man or, you know, other things that you might be watch on television. And really, I guess it gets beaten out of us, I suppose. Or not beaten out of us, but, you know, gets discouraged. It gets discouraged over the years. But it's really just a continuation of that ability to be able to dress up as someone different, you know, have a different persona. You know, and it really makes you feel good to go out dressed as something that you know, someone you admire, or, you know, someone you wouldn't normally be, change your personality. Okay. And there's a great community of cosplayers that also makes everybody very welcome, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, great. So how does 3D printing help cosplay?
Well, I think 3D printing's a big game changer for cosplay. In the past, people have made things out of wood and foam especially, and they've, you know, can only make clothing out of traditional methods. Nowadays, you can make props that are 3D printed. They can be screen accurate. They can feel like they should as a proper weight, and you can reproduce them. So if you need to make more than one, you can make 2, 3, 4, however many you want.
If you break one, you can just
make it. If you break one, you can make it. You can make it stronger. Yeah. It does require some more skills in terms of designing stuff if you want to design it, but otherwise there's so much you can download off the internet that, you know, you've got quite a wide range of things you can print. Clothing wise, you can now design things in 3D and print those out as wearables. So you can print chainmail, you can print, I've printed corsets for people for their costumes to imitate leather. Yeah. And once you've painted those up and weathered them, they look very much like the real thing.
Yeah, wow. So Chris, tell me, what sort of things you 3D print for people?
So in our day-to-day job of 3D printing, we print all sorts of things from prototypes for engineering firms to replacement parts for cars. Yeah. In our cosplay side of the business, we print, as I've just mentioned, corsets and clothing for people, wearable stuff, gauntlets, that sort of thing. We've done the Wonder Woman corset, you may have seen that at Oz Comic Con. We do weapons as well, as all sorts of other small pieces that might adorn your clothing or you carry as a prop for cosplay.
Okay, so what sort of work would go into a piece like this? This is obviously the beginning of an axe, is it, or?
That's right, this is Stormbreaker from Thor Stormbreaker from Avengers. Mm-hmm. And it's a 6-piece print. There's 3 parts for the head of the axe, and we can see there's the completed and partially painted one that we've done so far.
Wow.
And then there's another 4 or 5 pieces in the handle, which is limited by the size of your printer. So if you find that, you know, you need to split the piece up into smaller pieces, then you just do that and print them and join them as you go along. Once that's done, then they're glued together and painted, as we can see here.
Yeah, right. So how much? What material do you use to print these in mainly?
So mostly I print in PLA. The handles that are long, as this one is, I would print in PETG these days because it just has a better layer adhesion and is a bit stronger to take the sort of the forces that may be applied to a handle that size.
Yeah.
So,
fair enough. And how much post-processing goes into a piece like this? I mean, sanding, obviously there's painting, filling and all that sort of thing?
Well, once we finish printing, we will glue the pieces together, so we've got the completed body. I'll then paint on a 2-part epoxy, which self-smooths, and that will take out a lot of the layer lines. And from there, we'll sand it down. Any cracks where the joins go that haven't been filled by the epoxy, we will fill those and sand those back. And I'll keep going until I can't feel by hand any seam line where the join is.
Mm. So whereabouts roughly, I can't see it at the moment, but whereabouts roughly would this be joined, for example?
About there.
Yeah.
And around about here somewhere.
Right. And so
I can't even tell now.
No, you've forgotten. So where the epoxy flows, that's covering up the join as well?
It will cover it to an extent. It won't cover it completely. You try to smooth the epoxy down with a foam brush or a paint brush to get a fairly thin coating.
Yeah.
And also take off too much excess, otherwise it will pool in places and have runs and dribble marks and so on.
Yeah, right.
So we keep painting it down. So there will be a little seam where it's still showing.
Yeah.
Sometimes if it hasn't, if it's warped slightly off the plate, sometimes you get a little bit of curl at the edges of your print, then you will have those also showing, so you have to fill those. And I usually use either a car 2-part body filler that you use for panel repairs on cars, or what they call a blade putty, which is a finishing putty. It's an air drying putty, and you just smear it on, and then once it's dry, you sand it back, and it only takes 5 or 10 minutes to dry out.
Chris, just back to the printing of these parts, what layer height do you normally use, or does it vary depending on what you're doing, or?
It will vary on the sort of surface finish I'm looking for, but also if you're going to epoxy over things and putty them, and you don't really need to worry too much about getting rid of layer lines. So in most cases, around about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters is the layer height. I would use something that I'm going to epoxy over. If you want something with a really nice finish, maybe like the end of the blade of the axe, we may print at less than that, but of course it takes a lot longer, and you're still going to epoxy over it. So all of that was epoxied over. The only problem with epoxy is you have to be careful is that for fine detail, so on this version of the head, where there's text or fine detail, if you're not careful, that will be filled with epoxy. So what we do is we sort of brush over it lightly and leave the inside of it still a bit rough. Yeah. And this will be darkened up anyway when it's painted, so you won't really notice the line work in there.
And obviously the colour that you're printing in doesn't really matter?
No, that's right. In most cases, you're going to paint over it. So whatever's in the machine or whatever you've got the most of. So, I had enough on one roll of white to do that, ran out, so then I just changed over to black and printed that in black.
And I guess, as you say, it's going to be painted anyway, so it doesn't matter.
You could have pink and blue and it wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter.
Unless you scratched it.
Yeah, that's true. So Chris, tell us, you spoke about the joins before. How do you actually join them?
So we usually join these with wooden dowels or carbon fibre rods. So you can see here we have some normal wooden dowels you buy from Bunnings, as a matter of fact, as a small 1-inch dowel. Yeah. And they just happen to fit perfectly in these holes. So they'll go in there, and there's a mating hole on the other side which matches up, and we can just join them like that. We usually use...
Could you 3D print those dowels?
I don't think so. I think you need something a bit stronger than that.
So the wood gives enough
strength? The wood gives it the extra strength. The carbon fibre better because it's even more rigid and even lighter, so it gives it even more strength. So we tend to use dowels, sometimes depending on the length of the piece we need, but we'll try and run a single piece right up the centre just to give that thing a lot of strength. The longer the handle, the more strength it's going to need.
And you obviously design the files so they have that internal...
Yes, so these files are downloaded from Thingiverse.
Yep.
and there may be a link in the bottom to the file.
We can add a link there for sure.
A very good design, very close to the movie prop. And then I've gone in and in some cases, if there aren't any holes, in this case there were some, but I will go in and actually put some holes in with a program like Blender or Fusion 360.
Yeah.
And that just gives it then the strength, because otherwise you're only relying on the plastic on plastic join, and most cases that can be not very strong because the plastics don't adhere to each other very well. So even using things like super glue, you can still get it coming apart if you're not careful. I am using epoxy sometimes, polyurethane glues. I'm now using a new product from the US called 3D Gloop, and it's a chemical bond between the PLA plastics.
Okay.
And I'm hoping to try that out and see how that goes very shortly, and it should provide the strongest bond you can get.
Yeah, right. And one thing I didn't ask you, infill. What sort of infill are you printing these in?
So again, it depends on how strong the part needs to be. So for the handle, which might take quite a beating at a convention or on display, I print at a higher infill, so it's quite a weighty piece. But it gives it that feel that you're going to be able to, it's going to look, when you're wielding it for photos and stuff, you'll find that it's quite, it has a feel to it that it's a proper axe rather than a piece of foam.
Yeah.
So we will have quite a reasonable infill on that, maybe 30%, 20%, and then we have quite a lot of external walls, so maybe 5 walls on that. On this piece, which doesn't need to be that strong, it might be a slightly more open infill, and maybe only 4 walls. Just depends on where it's sitting and what it's going to be, where it's going to be exposed to possible knocks and bumps.
Yeah, sure. So, Chris, you work with Mike, who was also on the stand at Comic-Con with us, and he's a very, very talented airbrush artist, and he'll be joining us here as well to talk about what he does. But you do your own painting as well. This was hand painted, was it?
That's right. So to get a texture to it that is similar to wood, I tend to paint a lot of my wood objects by hand with just paint pots from Bunnings, as a matter of fact. So I'll pick certain colours that match the sort of finish that I want, and I'll start with a base coat of a brown or a black, and then I'll just keep adding layers to it. And this is what's called dry brushing, so I'll just keep going over it, and this has probably got 12 layers of dry brushing on it, and I'll just paint it one way, and then I'll paint it a different direction to get some texture and some cross pieces and a bit of hatching. So it looks a bit more like dry wood. It varies from item to item. So I've got an axe handle that I've done, which I wanted to look like an oak. So I've just gone down with a wash of black, which is basically black paint diluted with water till it's very runny, and just run it down the straight brown handle just to give it some grain. So it's still smooth, like it's been hand worn.
Yeah.
But this one I wanted it to have a nice texture to it, a nice feel to it, so that it's got highlights and shadows still from the darker point. The darker lower parts have been darkened up, but the high surfaces have been brightened up a bit just to give it some feel and a good contrast.
Yeah. Oh, it looks great. Chris, on the stand, you had an amazing Terminator Arm. Unfortunately for us, you sold it on the day, but fortunately for you, because it was great for you to be able to sell it. But it was incredible. Hopefully you'll be seeing some shots of it now. Tell us, how did you make that?
So that's actually a piece that's been printed. Every individual part was printed separately. Originally, I printed it all out of PLA, but I found that the finger joints, which are all separate individual pieces between the knuckles, there were washers in there, all part had to be 3D printed, little pins that go through it, and they were just so detailed, and the support that they required made it quite a job to clean up. So I decided I'd print the finger pieces out of resin and
Monocure resin, of course.
Monocure resin, of course.
Yeah.
And the joining parts above the palm, because they were all interlocking. So even the little pistons were 2 pieces, and we had to slide one inside the other. So the fact that the resin has such a high tolerance when you print it, you can just slide those straight in. And because it sands so nicely, you can just, if it doesn't fit perfectly, you just give it a light sand, and it looks the same, and you just slide it in and it's perfect. So we put it took hours to put all those pieces together. They were all super glued together.
Sure, yeah.
And then everything from the palm down was filament printed.
Yeah.
And we had to sand and epoxy coat those. Wow. Once that was all glued together, then it required, we painted it with a special chrome paint called All Clad, and it required a very high gloss black undercoat, and then we spray over this very fine coat of a chrome finish, which gives it that chrome look, which most people thought was metal, made out of metal, and didn't think that we'd 3D printed it, which was our aim to do.
Yeah.
So yes, we sold that, and we'll be making another one shortly.
Yeah, excellent. Chris, there was a lot of guys that came to us who, at the stand at Comic-Con, who were very interested in the 3D printers. We had them all running there. And I guess what I need to ask you is, what would your top 5 tips be to those guys who were thinking about getting into 3D printing? What would you say to them?
I'd say the first thing you would want to do is get to know your printer very well if you're going to just buy one that's already pre-built. Even better, if you like do-it-yourself sort of stuff, you could buy a kit and build it from a kit. This gives you the ability then, because you put it together, you know how to pull it apart when inevitably, whether it's a $500 printer or a $15,000 printer, the nozzle will block or something will play up and you'll have to fix it. And rather than send it back to a manufacturer or get someone in to fix it, you put it together, so you know how to pull it apart and fix it. That's my first tip would be, if you really want to get into it, that's a good idea. It also means that you can buy a bigger print volume for the same price as a printer that you would buy already pre-made. Okay. The second one would be stick with PLA filament until you're quite experienced. PLA is a very easy filament to print with. It doesn't warp, it sticks to the bed nicely, you don't have issues with it. So stay with that. It behaves well for almost anything, apart from leaving it in the car on a hot summer's day, it would be fine.
Yeah. So number 3, Chris?
Make sure your bed's level all the time, because lots of people will have printing issues where the print doesn't stick to the bed properly or it falls over, and there's a sweet spot where you've got to get the nozzle just low enough that the stuff sticks to the bed, but not too low that it grinds it into the bed and you can't get it off. So getting that spot right is very important.
How do you do your levelling if you don't have automatic levelling on your
So
printer?
I still use the paper method, which is you slide your bit of paper under the bed, between the nozzle and the bed every time, and adjust the screws on the corners.
And it's that slight grip.
It's a slight drag. But even then, I will still look at the print. I'll do a number of test prints, and I will still look at how it's coming out and still adjust it while I'm doing it. So it takes a little while to get it right, but if you can get it right the first time, then you can leave it for a lot longer than if you get it half right and then it gets out a little bit and then you've got to adjust it again. So if you get it right the first time and take a bit extra time, then you will find that it will last longer and you can just get the prints off easier, which means you're not forcing the bed and making it out of alignment again.
And I think you told me a good trick as well is do it once, the levelling, but then do it again.
That's right, because there's always, as each corner's being moved, there's always a slight adjustment. So I always do it twice, and once you get it right, once you get the idea, you can see just by eye how it's sticking to the bed, and you'll soon be able to feel it or see it just from the first layer, whether it's right, and then you can sort of adjust the little knobs as it's going even, you know, and sometimes you can get it just to do that. So it's really important that it does that, because that means you're not going to get warping as much. You're not going to have any issues getting it off the bed, and you'll get a better quality print that way. Slow the printer down. You know, don't go printing at the maximum speed. The slower the printer goes, and the finer the layer height, the better quality finish you're going to have.
Yeah. Okay. So what, 50% for the first layer is good?
50% of the first layer is usually good. Yeah, I don't usually print more than about 50 millimeters a second. Yeah. For my normal prints, if I'm doing a high quality print, I'll even get into 10 millimeters a second. Okay. You're taking all this time and effort to print something out. Why ruin it by trying to get it out in a hurry when if you're taking an extra, it might be 12 hours or so. Yeah. You can get a print that's a lot easier to finish, and that'll save you time on finishing it and getting it looking good.
I noticed something the other day I had to do that was very small, and I reduced it right down to 20. And it was the difference between it printing and it not printing.
That's right.
So
I
guess.
And even on cheap printers, you'll find that if you slow it down slow enough, it will have fantastic finish just by slowing it down. I've got a really really inexpensive kit printer that will print with no layer lines at all if you slow it down to 10 millimeters a second. Because it's the vibration of the head moving around and the plate moving around that causes a lot of that line definitions on the side of a print.
Okay, so what about tip number 4?
Lots of YouTube videos.
Yeah, that's a good tip.
Lots of YouTube videos from, on ideas on what to print, how to fix problems, and there's always someone out there that's already done, had issues or done something. So my first,
learn from their mistakes.
That's right. Right. And pick a printer that has a big user base. That's what I always tell people these days, because that means that if you have a problem, then there's always someone out there who's probably fixed it for you. There's big communities out there that use these printers, and there's a lot of discussion going on, a lot of tweaking, a lot of improvements.
Well, it's so easy. I mean, you have a problem, you put it on Facebook group saying, "Can you help me?" and you get 5 people answering your question.
That's right. Yeah.
There's no longer do you need to ring up the shop and say what's going on.
That's
the community's there to help, and I think the 3D printing community at the moment is at that stage where everyone's really wanting to help each other.
Yeah.
So
But you do need to remember that 3D printers aren't plug and play. You're not going to just be able to plug it in and it'll run seamlessly for ever and a day. They are machines that require maintenance and care, and there's parts on the machine that will wear. The nozzles, the Teflon tubing, if you've got a Bowden style tubing extruder, things like that will always wear. The belts can wear, the wheels can wear, and so you've got to make sure everything's working right, and you've got to take the time to look at the part in the machine and make sure it is still functioning correctly after a while.
Well, I guess the good thing about them though is that most of the parts you just mentioned are relatively cheap, inexpensive parts.
That's right.
And they do wear, but they're not expensive to replace or hard to replace either.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of because of the kit ones are an open source one, you can go and just buy replacement parts off eBay or from local sellers who can sell it to you. The prices are very good for the parts.
Definitely.
And you can just change the parts over yourself. You can change any part of the printer out yourself.
Yeah, and a lot of the parts will work on one print or work on another.
That's right. Right.
Yeah, so that's good. So the final tip, Chris, what is it?
Print everything you can get your hands on.
Don't stop printing.
Don't stop printing.
Just keep printing.
And experiment. Have fun and try different settings, and just get to know your printer. The more you print, the more experience you get. The more you can work out how to get the best out of your printer.
I think it's really good for people to start by printing, and most people do. I mean, I certainly did, and I know you did, with downloading files that were accessible already from sites like Thingiverse, which are great. But then to move into learning to model yourself, I think is really important. Using a program like Fusion 360. It just opens up so many new doors for you,
that's right.
and just it means that all of a sudden, if you can think of something, then you can print it essentially.
That's right.
And I think that's what opens up so many doors for people. And what made a lot of people at Comic-Con so excited when they came and spoke to us, it's like, what, I can make whatever I want, and they couldn't quite understand
that's
that.
Right.
And I think that's what keeps you and I in this game and keeps us getting out of bed in the morning.
Oh, absolutely. It's just so much fun, and you feel like a magician, an inventor, all rolled into one, because you can just set the printer going at night, and next morning something's magically appeared on the print bed.
That's it. Something that you didn't have the night
that's
before.
Right.
There it is. So it's pretty exciting stuff, and I think with people like yourself in the industry, to talk to and pass on the knowledge. There's a lot of other people who are willing to help, out there, and it's just a matter, as you say, to join the groups and get involved.
That's right.
And get yourself a 3D printer and just get into it.
That's right. Let's print stuff.
Just print stuff.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thanks a lot for joining us.
My pleasure.
Mate, that's great advice, great tips, and to learn about this Cos-Play, what would you call it?
Cos-Play fun.
To learn about this Cos-Play fun is something.
Cos-Play adventure.
Yeah, the Cos-Play adventure. To learn about this Cos-Play adventure is something I don't know a lot about. So, I'm sure some of you guys don't know either. So it's been really interesting for you to explain it to us and bring these models in today. And it's always good to catch up.